Alright, so here are your background notes on Chaucer. This is just going to be about Chaucer himself, and then I'll move on to the general prologue background in a separate lecvid. So I'm really narrowing this down for you guys. A couple of things before I actually get into Chaucer himself. You need to know that this is a frame story. That's the genre. And remember, when I discussed Dante, this is not in your notes, so you'll need to get this down. When I discussed Dante, I told you that Boccaccio, who first invented frame stories, Boccaccio was the one who named Commedia, he named it Divina Commedia, because he thought that the piece was divine and that Dante was the divine poet. He is credited with writing the first frame story. You need to know what a frame story is if you don't know what that is already. In this case, it's a group of individual tales that are all connected by a common thread. Boccaccio did that in a piece he called the Decameron, and this is the same thing that Chaucer did. He copied off of Boccaccio. All right, so Chaucer was about 57 years old when he died, so by today's standards, he died very young. By those standards, it was about average. He was often called the father of English poetry during this time period, which was 14 and in the very early 15th century. So just remember that he lived basically in the middle 1300s to the year 1400. In Chaucer's England, most of the people spoke Middle English, which was a combination of the Anglo-Saxons and the Normans. They are actually our ancestors of modern English. So what we speak today, and even Shakespeare, is a version of this. So when we get into the general prologue recitation, you'll be able to recognize a lot of words. So it's not Old English, it's Middle English. Before Chaucer, it was not popular to write in English. All the writers wrote in Latin, so he really did break new ground by writing in English, especially in the vernacular. Some believe that it was almost perverse to write in English and to be published in English. He was very well known. He served under 3 different kings. They're listed there. And he composed in the vernacular just like Dante, so they had a lot in common. Everyday language that was spoken in London. He did it for the same reason that Dante did. Again, he copied a lot off of Dante. It came out of Dante's overcoat. He wanted the average person in London to be able to read this, and that's why he did it. Same reason that Dante did it. He was born of a middle-class family in London. His father was a wine merchant, and so he had a little bit of money, not a lot, and he provided for young Geoffrey's education, but he didn't go very far into his education. The family could only afford so much. Eventually, he became a page to a wealthy family, and that's where he received fine training in good manners, and he learned how the wealthy lived. A page is really just a servant and assistant. During the 100 Years' War, he was actually a soldier. He was captured in France, and the king paid his ransom to get him out because the king was one of his patrons, and he wanted young Geoffrey to write, and so he paid for him to be released. He married a woman and had at least 2 children that we know of. Like Dante, he didn't love this woman. In fact, he grew to hate women. He was a politician, justice of the peace, and also became a member of Parliament. This was extremely important to him early on in his career. In fact, it took precedence over his writing. The first book or any piece of literature that brought him fame was called the Book of Duchess, and it was in memory of his patron's wife, and you need to get his name down here. His patron was actually Sir John of Gaunt, G-A-U-N-T. He was the Duke of Lancaster, England, and his wife died of the plague, and Chaucer wrote this book in memory of her, for him. He wrote 3 great allegorical poems. You know what an allegory is. Remember, that's a piece of writing that has 2 levels of meaning, literal and metaphorical. The 3 that brought him fame are listed here. The most famous of the 3 is Troilus and Cressida, only because Shakespeare wrote a play based on Troilus and Cressida. So yes, Shakespeare was very influenced by Chaucer. Chaucer traveled to Italy you don't have to remember when, but when he was in his 20s, he traveled to Italy and was greatly influenced by these guys, Dante, of course, Petrarch, who we will study next quarter, is the inventor of sonnets, and also Boccaccio. And I told you this before, that Boccaccio used a device called the frame story, that technique, and it was exactly what Chaucer decided he wanted to do. His frame story, Chaucer's frame story, is a religious pilgrimage, and his original plan was that each of his pilgrims, and he had 29 pilgrims on this journey, each of the pilgrims would tell 2 tales on the way to their destination and 2 tales on the way back. So each would tell 4 tales. So do the math, 29 pilgrims, and they would each tell 4 stories. He started the Canterbury Tales in 1387, but he never finished. He did finish 24 of the tales, but that was not even a fourth of what it would have been. The book would be huge. If you remember the book I showed you, the books in my class, that would be huge. So it would be at least 4 times that size. He is still considered one of the greatest writers of all in English literature. And this is because of his spirit, his personality, his language. It all shines through. Big thing that he focused on was irony. He delighted in irony. Some of the things that we think are funny today, they thought were funny then. So I think you're going to be really surprised by that. Dominant meter, no surprise, is iambic pentameter. You guys know what that is. That's basically what we speak every day before we have to take that big breath. It's usually about a sentence, a thought. That's our typical speech. His favorite rhyme scheme is the couplet. You will definitely see that in your recitation. So gone is the old English, the days of the Anglo-Saxons, Beowulf, etc. And then the upcoming is going to be the modern world of Shakespeare, modern English, and that's what we'll do next with Hamlet. He died October 25th, so the anniversary of his death is coming up. 1400, and his tombstone is in Westminster Abbey. He was the first of the famous English writers to be buried in Poets' Corner here. It's a real popular tourist site. Coghill, a modern-day translator, wrote right over, he provided the words for the inscription. It says, "The father of English poetry lies in his family vault," right there. He was religious all of his life, very religious, very comfortable with his own Christianity. However, he firmly believed in God's love and mercy, and he doubted that real-life friars and popes had much to do with anyone reaching heaven. So very similar to Dante in that respect. His theme throughout his work is God is love, evil is non-love. Things that lead a man to self-love also lead him to forget the cornerstone of Christian faith. Okay, guys, let me repeat that. His theme is God is love, evil is non-love, and the things that lead a man to self-love also lead him to forget the cornerstone of Christian faith. I want you to go over the significance of Thomas Becket as an important figure in medieval history and in the Canterbury Tales. This is the shrine that these pilgrims are going to visit. He is a Norman, and the Normans are the group from France who fought and took over England in 1066, the Norman conquest. You should have already studied about that, definitely sophomore year. And those people who were previously Anglo-Saxons became a combination of Anglos and Normans. He was Henry's best friend. He was appointed both Archbishop of Canterbury and Lord Chancellor of England by Henry, so he had 2 powerful positions, most powerful positions in the state. He was murdered by 4 of Henry's knights at the cathedral, and ironically Henry erected a shrine and did some penance just to avoid public outrage. All right. Done.